Kiitoksia herra ministeri kannustavista avaussanoista seminaarille ja työlle, jonka täytyy jatkua. Arvoisat vieraat, joudun nyt tässä kohtaa kovasti pahoittelemaan, että meidän keynote speakerimme tohtori Pachauri joutui noin vuorokausi sitten loppujen lopuksi peruuttamaan tulonsa tähän tilaisuuteen ja olemme tässä tehneet hektisesti töitä tilanteen paikkaamiseksi ja me saimme myöhään eilen illalla sitten tohtori Pachaurin tervehdyksen, jonka nyt esitämme tähän alkuun ennen kuin jatkamme muutetulla ohjelmalla.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for not being with you in person. I had every intention of spending the best part of the day on the 7th of November with you, but unfortunately some unforeseen developments have made it impossible for me to be there. I have to reach Valencia, Spain on the 7th evening, which in any case I was planning to do from Helsinki. But there are some requirements that I have to meet in order to ensure that the synthesis report of the IPCC, which is up for approval in a prolonged meeting in Valencia, Spain, is not in any way jeopardized. So once again, my deepest apologies for not being with you. But I'm really grateful for this opportunity to say a few brief words to you by way of greetings and by way of what I think is going to be critically important to global society on this occasion. Let me say that the reality of climate change is something that we cannot ignore any longer. And I think business and industry in particular has to be an important part of the solution. If business and industry is not part of the solution, then it will be seen as part of the problem. And there's also a very clear requirement for business to be proactive in this area, because the impacts of climate change will carry a cost, and that cost will reflect in the cost of production of goods and services. There are parts of the world, for instance, where the water regime will change substantially, and with, let's say, growing scarcity of water, there would be problems with regard to the cost of those operations where water is a major input, and this is true of most of industry. Similarly, if there are going to be extreme events, as is projected with a great deal of confidence, then there would be loss of life and property. And all of that will have to be paid for in some form or the other by business and industry, either through lost opportunities for marketing or direct costs that it might have to incur in several cases. And there have been a number of recent events, even the floods that took place in the UK a few months ago, and the peculiar situation of a part of Greece suffering from heat waves and another part suffering from excessive floods. Now, floods and droughts, incidentally, are going to increase all over the world. And we also know that in the case of the lower latitudes, there would be a decline in precipitation levels, but in the upper latitudes in the northern hemisphere, there would be an increase in precipitation. But all of this will be accompanied by an increase in the frequency and the intensity of extreme precipitation events. I can say much about the impacts of climate change, and some of these are going to be felt in the poorest and the most vulnerable regions of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, parts of China, Latin America. And these are areas where we already have some very heavy stresses on account of natural disasters, on account of a lack of natural resources, water for instance. And to this will be added the stresses that will come as a result of climate change. Now, I'm highlighting this because the Nobel Peace Prize Committee has, in its wisdom, decided to award this year's Nobel Peace Prize to the IPCC and former US Vice President Al Gore. This clearly highlights that they see a link between climate change and peace and and stability in different parts of the world. Now, one particular area where we need to show some concern and perhaps and come up with some proactive planning would be in respect of movement of populations. Populations in different parts of the world could move as a result, for instance, of coastal flooding. And there are many locations, particularly the mega deltas in Asia, that would be particularly vulnerable to coastal flooding and the effects and impacts of sea level rise. Now, in such cases, there is always the danger that people in large numbers may have to move. And when that happens, there would be tensions, there would be some possible loss of stability and peace in different parts of the world. There are also problems related to agriculture. The impacts of climate change on agriculture in several regions could be negative. In fact, there is growing evidence that this is already happening. I can say this with some authority on research that's being carried out in India, which clearly shows that the impacts of climate change, let's say on the productivity and yields of wheat, are going down, and therefore there would be some threat to food security, not only locationally in these places, but also globally. Now, when there is a problem with respect to availability and supply of food and food grains, populations will move. We have had serious famines in the past, and thank God the world has been able to solve this problem to a large extent. But there is the possibility that climate change could bring about an exacerbation of some of these conditions related to lack of nutrition, lack of food security, and when food supplies are threatened and the ability of societies to be able to buy food in the global market when prices increase as a result of the impacts of climate change, then clearly we are looking at some threats to peace in different parts of the world. What can business and industry do? Well, happily what we have found is that the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions is not an expensive business at all. As a matter of fact, if we were to stabilize our concentration of greenhouse gases at a level that would limit the temperature increase at equilibrium to 2 to 2.4 degrees centigrade, then the cost in 2030 will not exceed 3% of the GDP. That's not a heavy cost to pay at all, because all that means is that the prosperity that the world would reach in 2030 would at best be postponed by a year, a maximum of a year. And if that's the case, clearly we must look at the benefits that would accrue as a result of avoided or delayed impacts of climate change. And therefore, for business and industry, it is important to remember that you have to be leaders. If the world is going towards a low carbon future, which is inevitable, just look at the amount of public support that there is for moving towards a low carbon economy. Then those industries that read the writing on the wall and are prepared to be early birds and early starters in bringing about this change are the industries and the companies that are going to thrive. Those who don't are the ones who would lose out in the competition that's going to change in the future. There's a whole range of sectors in which we can bring about changes, and those technologies in several cases are available. And I think it is important for society in Finland, which has been a great leader in technological innovation and development, to come up with a vision of what kinds of technologies need to be developed and disseminated. And I'm sure this will benefit not only the world at large, but companies that are going to innovate, companies that are going to develop these technologies. There is, of course, a large number of technologies that exist, as I mentioned already. Now, these can be supported by policy measures, such as a price on carbon. And this would ensure that not only are those technologies refined and improved, but get disseminated on a large scale. Now, I would say that Finland, as an important country in Europe, can take the lead in ensuring that negotiations at the global level lead to something that would provide a much higher price on carbon that we see in several parts of the world today. When that happens, research and development expenditure will increase, both from the government and the private sector. And of course, technologies that are developed, which are low carbon in characteristics, will be disseminated on a large scale, because the consumer would then get a very clear market signal to buy those technologies. So, in essence, may I say that I feel that we are in for a period of major change, and those companies, those leaders of business that can identify the change and move towards it are the ones that would thrive, that would prosper. Those who do not will not do so well. Finally, let me once again apologize for not being there in person. I deeply regret letting you down at the last minute, but please do accept the fact that I would not have done it if it was not because of compulsions that are totally beyond my hands at this point of time. I must say that I'm a great admirer of Finland and what this country of a very small population has been able to do. You've been great innovators, you are great leaders of technology, and I'm sure business and industry in Finland will remain a leader and will show the way to the rest of the world in meeting the threat of climate change. We have to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases rather urgently, and I think technology will be an extremely important part of this effort worldwide. I wish you all the best. I hope you'll remain in a leadership position, and I hope I will be in Helsinki very soon. According to my travel plans, I'll be there in the middle of February, when I hope I'll see some of you who are present on this occasion. Thank you very much.